teaspoon of fat or not, teaspoon of oil, you will solve the energy density problem. You will get an appropriate energy density in this one, which was far too low if you don't add the fat, but you will reduce the protein density and the iron density considerably because you are adding empty calories to this. So just underlining that you need a lot of other foods to have a high nutrient density. Fat content varies a lot between different foods. And one of the highest is breast milk. More than 50% of the energy from breast milk comes from fat. It's also in the foods or in the milks used for treating severe acute malnutrition, ready-to-use therapeutic foods. It's high, about 50%. The recommendations for foods for moderate malnutrition by Mike Golden is 35 to 45. There's been some recommendations on the optimal content of fat, which should be between 30 and 45 for complementary feeding. And if you go below 20 or 22, then you have a problem on growth, because again, they cannot accommodate enough. So again, from the complementary feeding period, what happens is that you have a dramatic decrease in breast milk, in fat. Breast milk is 52% approximately. Family food can be 20 to 30 on average. The opposite happens with protein. Breast milk, despite that you grow at a very high speed, the relative amount of protein in breast milk is low, only 5 energy percent, and in family food it's 15 to 20. Not that we should give infants this low amount, but we should again be careful not to give them extremely high amounts. Fat quality is important. Long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acids, especially N-6 and N-3, are important. If you have a low intake, it's likely to have negative effects on development and immune function. You can increase it by giving fish and also using oils with high content of fatty acids, or N-3 fatty acids, which is soybean oil and rapeseed oil. And definitely not all oils have this high content. Coconut oil, palm oil, sunflower oil, and peanut oil have very low content of N-3. Some of them had a high content of N-6. And you should also be afraid of trans fatty acids, which has negative effects on cardiovascular disease, and perhaps it can prevent obesity, or it can increase the risk of obesity later on. Last time I was in Chennai, I took this photo just to illustrate what happens in most countries around the world, that you don't declare the oil. It says here refined oil, and often also in Denmark you would see that it's vegetable oil. You don't know which source it is. So it's important to be aware about of what oils are in the food of these small children. Between oil quality means a lot. And a little about trans fatty acids. It can increase, as I said, cardiovascular disease and the risk of later obesity. Vanaspati is a vegetable ghee which has a lot of trans fatty acids. It's used in street food in many low and middle income countries, and can have negative effects if you give that kind of food during the complementary feeding period. Then nutrient content of complementary feed is a huge area because there are so many nutrients and we cannot cover all of them. I will focus here on animal foods, and I have some more on that. That's important. It might be difficult. And also underline that vegetarian diet cannot meet nutrient needs at this age if you're not breastfed. Breast milk is an animal kind of animal foods, but if you are not breastfed, you need either milk or some animal foods. Otherwise, you have severe problems with growth. And they mention also here vitamin A-rich fruits and vegetables, and you should avoid drinks like coffee and sugary drinks, and limit the amount of juice in the diet to get a varied, optimal diet. So To repeat a few of the issues, small amounts of food consumed is a problem. High nutrient needs for growth and development is another issue. And some foods then have to be very high in nutrient needs, in nutrient density because of the high needs. And I have some slides here from Kay Dewey, which I think is important. We have a lot of stunting, but there are data suggesting that in prehistoric time, before agriculture, there were no stunting. And that happened when we introduced agriculture. And now we are slowly, in part of the world, trying to come back to the optimal adult stature again. And kind of the explanation could be that at that time they used pre-chewed food, pre-masticated food. And there's a lot of discussion if that is appropriate or not. But that's at least it could be an explanation for why in prehistoric time they got better food. They were most likely getting animal source foods and thereby nutrient-dense food. And here, if you look at the estimated iron intake, and you have 100% here is what you need during the 9 to 11 month period. If you only get breast milk, there's hardly any iron in breast milk. If you get the typical complementary foods, you get a little higher. If you have some animal foods, you get still higher. But here, if you get the pre-agricultural diet, you would cover the needs. And the same is here for zinc. I don't want to go into detail, but again, the animal foods are important to cover this. So, what about animal source foods? It has higher content of micronutrients, important for growth and cognitive development. Zinc, iron, B12 are especially important. Higher protein content and especially quality. In general, protein amount is not as a big problem, it's the quality that is a problem. You have no anti-nutrients, you have high energy density, you have a high fat content typically, and you have higher content of N-3 PUFA. So it can improve the growth of infant in many ways and also give them better cognitive development and prevent micronutrient deficiencies. So what kind of animal food should we use? It could be eggs. Eggs contains everything needed to build a chicken. And some of these can be used to build a small child as well. It provides essential fatty acids, proteins, choline, vitamin A, B12, selenium, and other important nutrients. And in some countries, it's affordable in a different way than other animal foods. But again, many of these food issues is in the cultural context. Is it available? Is it acceptable? And things like that. Another, I think, interesting source is small-hole dried fish. There's one photo from Ghana and one I took in the streets of Chennai with small fish. And if you powder these and give them to small children, it contains a lot of good sources, high-quality protein, highly bioavailable calcium, iron, and zinc. And it also helps absorb non-hem iron because of the nutritional components. Offal in blood is a controversial issue. Again, this is from Chennai. I took a photo from the market. It's the non-meat parts of the animal. It's useful, it's affordable, but again, it should be culturally acceptable. And that differs a lot between different countries. Liver, kidney, and intestine are mentioned here. Internal organs, heart, spleen, lungs, and so on. And some have tried to use blood or dried blood in some of these foods. It's still discussed and controversial. But there's an interesting brief and a Live and Thrive brief about this. We have done an intervention study in Cambodia, the Wind Food Project, where we used, in the right corner, you can see large deep-fried spiders that we powdered and included in the foods. So we used in the interventions powdered small fish and powdered spiders. And I should say that is very acceptable in Cambodia. The mother think it's a very good idea, and they like the idea. It would not be a good idea in many other countries, and not in Denmark as well. The mother will be very concerned. The product we had with small fish and micronutrient supplements had the same effect on linear growth as corn soy blend plus, which has milk powder added. We have published this in American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. The spiders, which was an arm with no micronutrient supplementation, didn't have as good an effect on iron status, so we are looking into that. So again, the idea was to use local, available, underutilized, affordable animal foods. Dairy products are needed if you are not breastfed, and I said that vegan diet is dangerous. If you have no other animal foods, it's suggested 200 to 400 milliliters per day. If no other animal foods are eaten, 300 to 500 milliliters per day is the recommendation. And I will recommend not to go above 500. We have in several European countries, we are now saying not more than 500, because it will reduce the diversity of the diet. You have many different acceptable milk sources, and again, it depends on the availability and where you are. And for the young infants, you shouldn't use skimmed or low-fat milk, because they need the fat in the milk. Or you could complement, if you have a powder, you can complement with other kinds of fat. But again, there are